Imagine having to build your entire moral compass from scratch every single morning.
Oh man, that sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Right. Like you wake up, and before you can even pour your coffee, you have to philosophically justify why you shouldn't lie to your boss today.
Right, yeah, or like logically deduce from first principles why courage is better than cowardice.
Exactly. And why loyalty matters, or why greed might, ultimately hollow you out.
The mental exhaustion of that alone would completely paralyze you.
You wouldn't get anything done.
No, of course not.
And yet, that is exactly the impossible task modern society often asks us to perform just by treating history like this dusty, irrelevant museum.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We definitely do that.
We really do. We assume that because we have smartphones and quantum computing, we're somehow exempt from the ethical and psychological dilemmas that plagued people 1,000 years ago.
Which is such a staggering blind spot, honestly.
It really is. It's this profound chronological arrogance.
Yes. Chronological arrogance. We look backward and just operate under the assumption that chronological recency automatically equals deeper wisdom.
Like newer is always better.
Exactly. We assume previous generations were simply, naive prototypes of us.
Just waiting around for the internet to be invented.
Right. But when you actually strip away the technological dressing, when you take away the internet, the antibiotics, the combustion engines, the raw fundamental architecture of the human condition hasn't changed at all.
Not even a little bit.
Nope. The software is identical.
Which, honestly, makes this particular deep dive so critical. Welcome, by the way, to the show. Today we are immersing ourselves in a worldview that aggressively challenges that modern bias.
I'm really excited for this one.
Me too. We are unpacking the core philosophy of the Scottish Knight of St. Andrew.
Which is a very specific, very deliberate archetype.
Highly deliberate. It's detailed in Chapter 29 of this profoundly intricate philosophical work, Morals and Dogma.
Yeah, and to really understand why this matters to you right now listening to this, we have to look at the structural journey that leads up to this point in the text.
Oh, absolutely. So Chapter 28, the immediate predecessor, was incredibly ethereal, right?
Very much so. It was this expansive, outward-looking pursuit of enlightenment, truth, and philosophical light.
But then there's this hard pivot.
Yeah, a really abrupt shift.
Chapter 29 abruptly grounds us. It shifts entirely to tradition, honor, and symbolic wisdom.
And that pivot is structurally brilliant, I think. It addresses a fundamental law of physics, which, applies equally to psychology.
How so?
Well, a tree cannot grow infinitely upward toward the light unless it has incredibly dense, heavy roots anchoring it deep in the dark soil.
Wow. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Right. If you only have the expansive pursuit of enlightenment without the grounding mechanism of tradition, the first intellectual or moral storm that comes along will just completely uproot you.
So Chapter 28 is the canopy.
Exactly. And Chapter 29 is the root system.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to focus on that root system. It really forces us to ask a difficult question.
It is.
What practical, actionable utility can we actually extract from traditions that are centuries old?
Yeah, the why should I care question.
Right. The Scottish Knight of St. Andrew treats tradition not as a collection of mandatory historical trivia, but as a real-time navigational tool.
Yes.
It's framed as a living source of wisdom. But, living tradition sounds like an oxymoron to me.
It does sound a bit contradictory at first.
Yeah. If it's tradition, isn't it inherently fixed in the past?
Well, only if you define tradition as a static object, which this archetype emphatically does not do.
Okay, so how do they define it?
The philosophy here redefines tradition as an active current. It provides three foundational pillars, which are identity, continuity, and wisdom.
Identity, continuity, and wisdom.
Got it. Think about the paralysis you described earlier, waking up and reinventing your ethics from scratch.
The pre-coffee existential dread.
Exactly. The Knight views tradition as the accumulated data set of human trial and error. It is a pre-existing framework.
So it's basically doing the heavy lifting for you.
Yes. By plugging into that framework, the Knight doesn't have to guess how to handle betrayal or how to navigate a moral compromise.
Because someone else already figured it out.
Right. The laboratory experiments have already been run by thousands of generations before them.
I see the functional utility in that for sure. But let's talk about the psychological aspect. You mentioned continuity.
Yeah, that's a massive part of it.
It seems to me that the anxiety of isolation is like the defining psychological epidemic of our current era.
Oh, without a doubt.
When you are completely untethered from any tradition, you are essentially a timeline of one.
A timeline of one. That's a great way to put it.
Right. You are born, you exist in this hyper-individualized vacuum, and your only reference points are your immediate peers and whatever the current news cycle is screaming about.
And a timeline of one is a deeply, deeply fragile state of existence.
It really is.
When your context is that narrow, every personal failure feels apocalyptic. Every societal shift feels completely unprecedented.
Because you have nothing to compare it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Scottish Knight deliberately connects to a timeline that dramatically dwarfs their own lifespan.
Okay, so it zooms out.
Way out. By adopting this living tradition, you transition from being a solitary floating data point to being a load-bearing link in an unbroken chain.
Wow, a load-bearing link.
Yeah, you inherit the triumphs, the catastrophic failures, and the slow, grinding progress of those who came before you.
That's a lot of weight.
It is. And simultaneously, you take on the responsibility of preparing the ground for those who will follow.
That drastically changes the scale of your life. I mean, if I'm a link in a chain, my individual momentary anxieties don't carry the same catastrophic weight.
Because it's not all about you anymore.
Right. But I have to challenge this premise just a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Because participating in the chain isn't always a romantic, empowering experience. Let's be honest, we've all encountered traditions that feel incredibly oppressive.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't feel like a comforting link. They feel like a shackle.
Yeah, that's a very real phenomenon.
Tradition can easily become an anchor, right? Like an anchor that holds a ship stuck in one miserable place, actively preventing it from ever catching the wind and moving to new, necessary horizons.
That's a really interesting analogy. But what's fascinating here is that if tradition is stopping the ship, it has actually ceased to be the living source the knight relies on.
Wait, really? So it's something else at that point?
Yeah, it is fossilized. I mean, think about it. An anchor's only physiological purpose is to arrest momentum.
True.
It is deployed specifically to stop the journey. But the Scottish Knight is fundamentally an active archetype.
They're supposed to be moving.
Exactly. They are tasked with moving through the world, engaging with it. Therefore, the weight of tradition functions completely differently.
So it's not an anchor.
No, it is not the anchor. It is the ballast.
Ah, the weight placed deep in the hull to lower the center of gravity.
Exactly. Ballast sits completely out of sight. It is incredibly heavy, and frankly, it takes up space that could be used for other things.
Right. It's not exactly convenient.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
But when the ship is hit by a massive storm, when the winds of societal panic, extreme moral confusion, or sudden disorienting technological upheaval hit.
Which happens constantly right now.
Constantly. When that hits, that ballast is the only thing keeping the vessel from capsizing.
That makes so much sense.
It absorbs the kinetic energy of the storm. It allows the ship to be battered, to tilt dangerously, but ultimately remain upright and continue moving forward.
So it's stability without stagnation.
Precisely. Ballast provides profound stability without ever inhibiting forward guidance.
That distinction changes everything. The ballast doesn't stop the voyage. It makes the voyage survivable.
That's the perfect way to summarize it.
But, okay, that brings us to the actual execution. Because having a hull full of philosophical ballast is great in theory.
Sure.
But how does the Scottish Knight actually deploy this on, like, a random Tuesday afternoon?
Right. How does it translate to the real world?
Yeah.
Right.
If we are talking about a living tradition, how does it translate into physical, waking reality?
Well, the answer provided by the text rests entirely on a very specific, highly demanding definition of honor.
Honor. Okay, that's a heavy word.
It is. And it's arguably the most misunderstood concept in modern vocabulary.
I would agree with that. We usually think of it as, like, reputation.
Yes. We tend to conflate it with reputation or pride or just how other people perceive us.
Like defending your honor in a duel or something.
Exactly. All external stuff. But for the Scottish Knight of St. Andrew, honor is an internal, structural reality.
It's built into them.
It is the absolute core of their character. And the text breaks it down into a three-part engine.
Okay, what are the parts?
Acting with integrity, upholding values, and maintaining principles.
Notice the verbs there.
Yeah.
Acting, upholding, maintaining. There is nothing passive about that.
Not at all. It requires constant effort.
We often mistake having good opinions for having honor. Like, you can sit on your couch, scroll through your phone, and agree with all the correct historical philosophers.
You can tweet about them all day.
Right. You can have a perfect encyclopedic knowledge of morality. But if that knowledge doesn't generate friction in your actual life, it's totally useless.
Absolutely useless. Knowledge is just data retention.
Honor is the implementation phase.
And the implementation phase requires navigating extreme resistance.
What kind of resistance?
Well, let's look closely at that third component, maintaining principles.
Okay.
To maintain something requires energy. It implies that a force is actively trying to degrade or destroy that thing.
Oh, like maintaining a house? Weather is constantly trying to ruin it?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Maintaining principles means upholding your moral framework, specifically when it is disadvantageous to do so.
When it hurts.
Exactly. If you have a rule that you always tell the truth, but you only deploy that rule when it makes you look competent, or when it's easy.
Then it's not a principle.
Nope.
Oh.
That is a preference.
Right. A principle isn't actually a principle until it costs you something.
It has to have a price tag.
It's when telling the truth is going to get you fired, or it's going to alienate your social circle, or it's going to cost you a huge, lucrative opportunity, and you do it anyway.
That's the friction.
The friction isn't a side effect of the honor. The friction is the forge where the honor is actually manufactured.
That is beautifully said. And that forge is operating in an incredibly complex modern environment right now.
No kidding.
Think about the ethical landscape we navigate today. We are dealing with artificial intelligence that can mimic reality, genetic engineering, massive global surveillance structures.
Stuff they couldn't even dream of back then.
Right. The architects of these ancient traditions couldn't have fathomed these specific technologies.
So a skeptic might ask, how can an ancient code of honor possibly apply to a bioethical dilemma?
It's the difference between a map and a compass.
Ooh. Okay, explain that.
If tradition gave the knight a highly specific step-by-step map, it would be utterly useless today.
Because the roads change.
The terrain has fundamentally changed. The borders have moved. The rivers have been dammed. The map is obsolete.
Right.
But true integrity acts as an internal compass. And a compass does not care what the terrain looks like.
Because it's tapping into something much bigger.
Exactly. It doesn't care if you're in a dense jungle or a modern metropolis.
Yeah.
The fundamental magnetic reality remains identical. North is still north.
That's brilliant.
The Scottish Knight doesn't search the tradition for a specific rule about, artificial intelligence. They rely on the internal mechanism of honor to point toward baseline human dignity and truth, regardless of the unprecedented external circumstances.
Wow. I really want you, listening right now, to evaluate your own framework through that lens.
It's a tough mirror to look into.
It really is. Look at the values you claim are essential to your identity. Are they just theoretical ideas you agree with?
Are they just like bumper stickers you display to signal to your peer group that you're one of the good ones?
Exactly. Or do they actually dictate your behavior when you are terrified or exhausted or threatened?
That's the real test.
It's terrifying to realize how many of our principles are just preferences waiting to be abandoned the moment they become inconvenient.
It is a sobering realization. And the sheer psychological weight of maintaining that compass is why this wisdom is not, and historically could not be communicated through plain text.
Wait, really? Why not?
Because everyday language is too fragile a vessel for this kind of heavy generational ballast.
What do you mean by fragile?
Words drift. Their definitions warp over time.
Oh, like slang changing.
Yes, but even core concepts. If you write down a complex moral imperative in the common vernacular of the year 1400, a reader in the year 2026 is going to completely misinterpret the nuance.
Because the cultural context is totally gone.
Exactly. The linguistic decay destroys the fidelity of the message.
Which explains the reliance on a completely different architecture of communication. And here's where it gets really interesting, folks. The secret language.
Yes, the secret language.
Yeah.
This is where the methodology of the knight gets truly brilliant.
So the Scottish Knight operates through the interpretation of symbolic wisdom.
Correct.
The text says symbols are used to preserve knowledge, communicate ideas, and actively guide behavior.
Those are the three main functions, yeah.
But I mean, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, why bury the lead?
How do you mean?
If the moral code is so vital to human survival, why hide it behind metaphors, geometric shapes, and cryptic imagery? Why make it a puzzle? Why not just publish it in a pamphlet?
Because the cognitive friction of solving the puzzle is the actual mechanism of learning.
Oh wow.
Think about human psychology. If I hand you a bulleted list of 10 moral rules, you will scan it, you might even memorize it, but you will not internalize it.
It requires no cognitive labor.
Exactly. It passes straight through your short-term memory without altering your fundamental architecture.
It's the terms and conditions effect.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
You scroll to the bottom and click accept without reading a single word because the plain text demands absolutely nothing of you.
Spot on. But if I present you with a complex symbol, perhaps an intricate emblem of a sword crossing a specific geometric angle, or, a deeply layered architectural metaphor,
Your brain is forced to stop.
it has to. You cannot just scan it. You have to interrogate it.
You have to ask, why are these two elements combined?
Right. What is the historical context of this shape? What did the tension between these angles represent?
So the knight is required to interpret the teachings.
Yes, the sheer effort of decoding the symbol forces the concept deep into the psyche. By the time you have successfully extracted the meaning from the symbol, it has become a permanent part of your intellectual framework.
It's like a ZIP file for philosophical data.
A ZIP file, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. On your desktop, a ZIP file is just a tiny icon. It looks incredibly simple, taking up almost zero space visually.
Right, just a little folder with a zipper.
But that simplicity is an illusion. When you double-click it, when you possess the software to actually unpack it, that tiny icon suddenly explodes into tens of thousands of pages of text, high-resolution imagery, massive libraries of data.
That is a brilliant analogy.
A Masonic or knightly symbol functions the exact same way. Visually, it might just be a compass or a flame or an anchor. It's compact.
Very compact.
But when the knight applies the interpretive tradition they've been taught, they unpack that simple image, and it reveals an overwhelming amount of preserved historical knowledge and highly complex behavioral directives.
The ZIP file analogy perfectly captures the density of the symbol. But we also have to look at its durability.
Right, because of the linguistic decay we talked about.
Exactly. The symbol completely bypasses the decay of language.
Because an image is universal.
Yes. The visual representation of a flame, signifying perhaps the preservation of truth or the fire of intellect, does not need to be translated from Latin to French to English.
The flame is always a flame.
The visual semiotics hold steady across centuries. The vessel remains perfectly intact, waiting for a mind with the right interpretive keys to unlock it.
So the symbol is durable and it's dense, but you mentioned earlier that the text claims these symbols actively guide behavior.
It does claim that.
How does a static shape actually alter what a person does in a moment of crisis? Like if I'm panicking, a picture of a sword isn't going to calm me down.
Well, it acts as an immediate psychological anchor point.
How so?
When a principle is encoded in a symbol, and the knight wears that symbol, or encounters it in their environment, it bypasses the slow, logical processing center of the brain.
So it's not intellectual in that moment.
No, it triggers an immediate, visceral recall. It's classical conditioning, but elevated to a profound moral level.
Oh, wow.
When the knight is faced with a terrifying decision, and they see that symbol, they don't have to mentally rehearse a long philosophical essay.
They don't have time for that anyway.
Right. The symbol instantaneously floods their nervous system with the weight of the history they carry.
It instantly connects them back to that unbroken chain of continuity.
Yes. It is a visual command that says, remember who you are, remember the ballast, do not compromise.
That is incredibly potent. So the knight is equipped with the ballast of living tradition. They are actively engaging in the friction of honor, and they are fluent in unpacking these high-density, symbolic ZIP files.
That's the toolkit.
When they successfully decode all of this, what exactly are they reading? What is the actual data inside the file?
It's not just abstract, lofty poetry, if that's what you're thinking.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I assumed. Just like nice philosophical musings.
No, they are reading the textbook of time. They are extracting highly specific, pragmatic lessons from the past.
Pragmatic. Really?
The text is very clear on the nature of these lessons. They're categorized with almost clinical precision.
Oh, like what?
Successes to follow, mistakes to avoid, and wisdom to apply.
That is very clinical.
It highlights the fundamentally analytical nature of the Scottish knight. This archetype does not view the past through a lens of romantic nostalgia.
Which goes against every pop culture depiction we have of traditionalists or knights.
Totally.
We picture them constantly longing for a golden age, wishing they could time travel back to when things were supposedly perfect.
Right, wearing armor and pining for the old days. But that nostalgic longing is a modern projection.
Interesting.
The Scottish knight approaches history like a forensic investigator walking into a sprawling, chaotic laboratory.
A crime scene of human history.
Kind of, yeah. Thousands of generations have already run the experiments on human organization, economics, power structures, and moral decay.
And a lot of those experiments blew up in their faces.
Exactly. So the Knight coldly analyzes the data. They identify the exact variables that led an empire to collapse under the weight of its own corruption, and they tag that data set as mistakes to avoid.
Smart.
Then they identify the socio-psychological conditions that allowed a community to survive a famine or a tyrant, and they tag that as successes to follow.
I mean, if you were leading a team or running a company, or honestly just trying to manage your own family dynamics, studying history this way is the ultimate asymmetrical advantage.
It's a huge advantage.
Because you physically do not possess enough years in your biological lifespan to make every single catastrophic mistake yourself.
No one does.
You don't have the time or the capital to test every terrible idea.
You'd run out of time very quickly.
Right, so by unpacking the symbols of the past, you get to bypass the lethal errors of your ancestors. You get to start the game on level 50 instead of level 1.
It's the ultimate life hack. But the crucial constraint here is found in that third phrase, wisdom to apply.
Ah, right. Implementation again.
It is the implementation phase all over again. Knowledge of the past, even forensic, analytical knowledge, is entirely useless if it remains theoretical.
Just writing essays about history doesn't fix today.
Exactly. If you can perfectly articulate the exact reasons why a specific historical movement devolved into tyranny, but you do absolutely nothing to check those identical behavioral patterns within your own organization or your own ego,
Then what was the point?
your historical knowledge is just intellectual vanity. The Knight demands that the data be applied to the present condition.
But, and this is a big but, applying historical data to the present reality inevitably forces a massive collision.
Oh, inevitable.
Because if we are honest investigators of the past, we have to admit that a lot of what our ancestors did was fundamentally flawed.
Very deeply flawed.
Not all traditions are noble. Some traditions were built on horrific oppression, flawed pseudoscience, or mere tribal cruelty.
Yes, that is an unavoidable historical fact.
This is where I struggle with the concept of being a traditionalist. What happens when the weight of tradition clashes violently with the absolute undeniable necessity for moral progress?
And this is where the philosophy of the Scottish Knight reveals its most sophisticated and challenging layer.
Do they address this?
The text explicitly addresses this collision. It acknowledges, without hesitation, that not all traditions hold equal value.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have expected that.
It's incredibly nuanced. The Knight is tasked with a terrifyingly delicate balancing act. They are commanded to preserve what is valuable, but equally commanded to intentionally let go of what is outdated.
Intentionally let go.
Yes, they must adapt wisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text insists that tradition must evolve. It is not allowed to become a barrier to legitimate growth.
That shatters the conventional definition of a traditionalist.
It really does.
We usually define a traditionalist as someone who defends the past indiscriminately, like someone who protects the entire structure, flaws and all, simply because it's old.
Right, the it's always been done this way mentality.
Exactly. But this text is demanding immense cognitive flexibility. The Knight isn't a museum curator, they're a ruthless editor of history.
Let's frame it using a concept from systems engineering, refactoring legacy code.
Ooh, I like this. Go on.
When you are maintaining a massive, decades-old software architecture, you cannot just blindly defend every line of code.
Right, because tech changes.
Some of those old loops are bloated, they are deeply inefficient, or they contain security vulnerabilities that will completely crash the modern system.
So you have to go in and clean it up.
Yes, the rigid traditionalist refuses to touch the code because it's original, and eventually the software becomes entirely incompatible with the new hardware, and the system dies.
Okay, but what about the opposite extreme? The reckless progressive.
Right, the person who has no respect for continuity. They come in, look at the bloated code, and say, this is all garbage, let's delete the entire foundational architecture and start from scratch.
And the moment they do that, the entire server crashes.
Exactly, because they didn't realize that a seemingly weird old piece of code was actually a load-bearing function keeping the database from corrupting.
The reckless progressive burns down the entire library because a few of the books contain outdated medical theories.
And leaves society wandering in the dark with zero accumulated wisdom.
So where does the Knight fit into this?
The Scottish Knight operates in the incredibly tense, highly nuanced middle ground. They are refactoring the legacy code.
They're the ones carefully editing it.
They must possess the discernment to identify which traditions are the load-bearing pillars of human dignity and which traditions are just obsolete, toxic loops.
That requires so much wisdom.
It requires deep respect for the past, combined with a radical, fearless openness to the future.
But practically speaking, how do you identify a dead tradition without accidentally severing a vital artery?
That's the hard part.
Like, say my family or my culture has done something a specific way for 400 years. The pressure to maintain that is immense.
Huge pressure.
Deciding to abandon it, to label it as an obsolete loop, is going to feel like a massive betrayal to my community. It's going to feel like I'm breaking that chain of continuity we spent so much time praising earlier.
It feels like a betrayal to those who confuse the form of the tradition with the function of the tradition.
Form versus function. Okay.
The knight adapts wisely by focusing on the core principle, not the external trapping.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If a 400-year-old tradition was originally designed to foster community cohesion, but in the modern era, that specific ritual has warped into a mechanism of exclusion and cruelty.
Then it's failing its function.
It is no longer serving its original function. The true betrayal of the ancestors would be to blindly continue a practice that actively damages the community.
Right. It's like pruning a tree.
Exactly like that.
You have to cut away the dead, outdated branches so the core of the tree, the valuable part, can continue to grow and bear fruit.
Yes, to prune the dead branch is an act of deep reverence for the health of the entire tree.
I love that.
Letting go of the obsolete is the only way to ensure the tradition remains a living, breathing mechanism rather than a fossilized relic.
You have to ruthlessly delete the obsolete code so the system can run the new updates.
Precise.
And when an individual actually pulls this off, when they manage to successfully navigate this tightrope,
Which is incredibly difficult.
when they retain the heavy ballast, decode the compressed symbolic language, apply the historical data to their present actions, and ruthlessly refactor the legacy code, what is the ultimate result?
Where does it lead?
Yeah, where does this intense philosophical labor actually lead a human being?
It leads to a profound, unshakable synthesis of identity and belonging.
Identity and belonging.
The text concludes that tradition, when engaged with dynamically, is the crucible that shapes the knight's sense of self. But crucially, it transcends the individual.
It goes back to that chain.
Yes, it generates connection, community, and what the source material explicitly calls a shared purpose. The Scottish Knight of St. Andrew deeply understands their exact coordinates within the larger context of human history.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring this directly back to you listening to this deep dive.
Because it is deeply relevant today.
So relevant. Think about the defining paradox of our time. You have instantaneous access to the entire sum of human knowledge in your pocket.
You can communicate with anyone, anywhere, at any time.
And yet, statistically and experientially, people have never felt more profoundly lost, more anxious, or more terrifyingly disconnected.
Tragic, really.
It is. Why is that? Because data is not a substitute for context.
Wow.
Understanding your place in a larger context, as this archetype demands, is the ultimate grounding mechanism. We are not designed to float through life as isolated, hyper-individualized data points frantically trying to invent our own morality every morning.
The timeline of one.
Right. We're designed for shared purpose. We're designed to belong to a community that spans across centuries, where the dead actively help the living navigate the present.
To synthesize the entire philosophical framework we've explored today, the Scottish Knight is not a romantic relic of a bygone era.
Not at all.
They are a highly advanced operating system for navigating chaos.
I love that phrasing. An operating system for chaos.
By actively committing to the excruciating friction of honor, by learning to decode the dense, durable, symbolic wisdom of the past.
By treating history as an analytical laboratory rather than a museum.
And crucially, by possessing the courage to ruthlessly edit and adapt what is outdated, the knight secures their identity. They become the living bridge.
They stabilize the present by anchoring it to the past while simultaneously preparing the architecture for the future.
It is a stunningly comprehensive approach.
A deeply demanding approach to living a life of actual consequence. The path of the Scottish Knight of St. Andrew is defined by the heavy ballast of tradition, the active friction of honor, and the thoughtful, necessary evolution of wisdom.
And if we look ahead in the source material, there's a fascinating and honestly somewhat intimidating tease for where this philosophical progression inevitably leads.
Ooh, a sneak peek. Where does it go?
The natural continuation of this journey moves into the realm of the Night Kadosh.
Night Kadosh.
Yes, if everything we discussed today was about laying the deep, heavy roots of tradition and establishing the internal compass of honor, the Night Kadosh is where those roots are violently tested by fire.
Oh, wow. Tested by fire.
It is a realm where raw courage, the unyielding pursuit of absolute justice, and significantly more dangerous moral complexities take center stage.
So the forge gets hotter.
Much hotter.
Man, I cannot wait to unpack the architecture of that next phase. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Something to think about while you go about your day.
Exactly. It builds directly out of the reflection segment of the source text, but we want to push it firmly into your reality right now.
The thought is simply this: tradition is not a passive inheritance.
You are not merely a helpless victim of the history you were born into.
Tradition is precisely what you actively, deliberately choose to preserve and what you consciously decide to live by.
So take a hard inventory of the traditions you participate in today.
Look closely at them.
Look at the rules you blindly follow, the corporate culture you accept at work, the unspoken family dynamics you perpetuate.
Ask yourself why you do them.
Right. Which of those are you repeating purely out of momentum, simply because that's how it's always been done?
And more importantly,
Which ancient codes, which deep, heavy ballasts are you actively, intentionally choosing to carry forward to build the foundation of your identity?
don't be a passive recipient of history.
Be the editor. Refactor the code, honor the roots, but do not be afraid to prune the dead branches. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep unpacking those symbols, keep seeking that fiction, and we will see you